Order. This is a special meeting of the Clark County Board of Education to discuss the working budget. I'd like to welcome everyone who is here, and let's go ahead and stand and observe a moment of silence. Now the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first item of business is adoption of the agenda.
I move that we adopt the agenda as presented.
Motion by Ms. Hicks.
Second.
Second by Ms. Ritchie. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Public comments? Not much public here, other than the sun.
Yay!
All right, okay.
Gotta have some enthusiasm.
Number 2 on the agenda is consider adoption of the 2017-18 working budget, and Dr. Bob Wagner is here to help us with that.
Why is it so hot in here before we start?
Thank you, Arlene.
They want a short meeting.
Well, it is a pleasure to be with you again this evening, and we are going to talk about the working budget a bit. There has been some adjustments since that you looked at it in May. Fiscal year 2017 finished and had some very concrete numbers at that point moving forward. So if we look at Table A on page 1, there are 5 funds that we constantly look at and are listed: the general fund, the special revenue, capital outlay fund, the facility building fund, and the food service fund. Of course, all of you know your general fund is where you have your most flexibility with. Special revenue fund, that's where all your grants go in, and that fund pretty much takes care of itself, because whatever the grant award is, as long as the receipts and the expenditures match, you're always going to balance to zero at the end of the fiscal year in most cases. Capital outlay fund is a restricted account. Its primary purpose is debt service, but you have some more flexibility with that one. The facility building fund is pretty much, for the most part, restricted to debt service. Now, over the last several years, the last 2 bienniums, I believe, the General Assembly has given the school district some flexibility with that. The current year, fiscal year 2018, when the budget was passed in the spring of 2016, it came with the caveat that in this fiscal year the Department of Education was required to develop some guidelines that made the use of those funds a little more restricted than they had been in the previous 2 bienniums. So the bottom line is if we look across those tables and go down to the items in column Table A and look at column D, we're expecting that the funds that are available to the school district to be approximately $2.6 million less for the current fiscal year 2017-18 than you had available in the 2016-17 year. Now, Table B on page 2 looks strictly at the general fund. And you can see that the difference between the actual, for example, column B looks at actual revenue for 2016-17, and column C looks at the proposed working budget for 17-18. And you can see the differences in what the expected revenue stream is. And we're expecting in the general fund at this point that the funds available to the district are going to be about $2.3 million less than what was available in 2016. And you can zero in very quickly and see that the major contributor to that is the fact that we anticipate other receipts will be substantially less in 17-18 than what was actually received in 16-17. Now, what precipitates that? Well, if you look at that part of in the municipal budget report, and you look on the category of other receipts, which is kind of the last category. It starts on page 3, because I looked that up a while ago and ends on page 4 of that particular report, you'll see that you booked in some considerable amount of money under fund transfers. So what's fund transfers? Well, if I recall correctly, late in the fiscal year, the district made a transfer from the capital outlay fund under the capital funds request, thank you, funds request of a considerable, as well over $1 million. So it came from, in that case, it came from the capital outlay fund and was moved into the general fund, and that's where it was booked in, was on that line. So I don't anticipate making that type of a request this year. So where does the $150,000 come from? The district has for some time used indirect transfer, which is about approximately, seems to average right around $150,000 from the school food service fund to the general fund. And as you look at back to table A, you can see that your school food service fund is very healthy, and that is a normal way of doing business. If that fund's doing well, then you are allowed to capture a certain percentage back to the general fund for general fund purposes. So I applaud you for that. That two things: one, that your school food service fund is very healthy, and two, that you take advantage of that. Now, table C.
Can you go back up to
Sure.
look at the rest of the items in B? The
In
444,000 under state GF revenue is due to
Mhm.
the seat decrease and the decreased ADA, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank
How
you.
about beginning balance is money we spent, right?
That's correct.
And so local general fund revenue. Now,
Well,
is that were we budgeting for the 4% increase, it took less than that, and that's the difference?
no, not really. You had a good collection year in 16, 17. But when we put it through kind of the formula, if you remember, we take the class of property times the adopted tax rate times a rolling 5-year average of collections. So that's how column C is determined on your local revenue piece. So at this point, because your collection was better than particularly anticipated in 16, 17, but using those parameters, we're estimating it's going to be a little less. But at the end of the day, so to speak, when June 30 rolls around, if you have another good collection year, you could beat or exceed the target and come very close to matching what the 16, 17 revenues were. And a big piece of that, if you'll recall, is that the piece of your local revenue stream that is extremely unpredictable revolves around PSC,
Right.
real estate and PSC tangibles. So, some years it's like, where did it come from? Other years, where is it?
Right.
So it kind of goes up and down. And yes, Mr. Heisel.
So then to follow up on that, in that same area, the information you presented to us back when we were doing the tax hearing, there were some projections at that time. Did they match up with what's in the budget, specifically motor vehicle tax revenue?
Motor vehicles should match. Now, the real estate would be pretty close, should be pretty close when you look at in one of the appendices of the tax levy report, where I use the 62.2 cent tax rate. Now, the report itself, of course, was built on what it would look like if the board adopted the 4% increase rate. But yes, it should match fairly close. Now, it could be off just a little bit, but your vehicles are pretty consistent. It doesn't matter what you adopt for the real estate or personal property tax rate. The motor vehicle stays consistent at 55.3. There we go. I had the digits in the wrong order, but 53.5.
So if the number that shows up in the working budget is less than what was in the tax, maybe that's just something that hasn't been updated yet, and that might be something a little benefit we might see later on down the
Good.
road.
Good. Because even though I work extremely hard to make all those numbers consistent, and sometimes they do change just a little bit, but it should match very, very closely when we look at all the local revenue. But keep in mind, one of the things that is in local general fund revenue too, for example, is the dollars that come to the district in lieu of taxes. So one of the things I do take account for in the tax levy document is utility taxes. So there's always the opportunity from that point, but quite frankly, I use what is in the tentative budget for utility tax receipts in that tax levy budget. And from that point into the working budget, it's not uncommon to make a slight adjustment sometimes in utility taxes that could cause the number to be a little lower, or even perhaps in some cases a little higher.
Okay.
Is that sufficient?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Table C is a little different look because you're looking at what was in the tentative budget that you looked at in May, and we're comparing it to what we're looking at this evening in September, and you can see some of the changes, and you can see that the major change here is in the beginning balance. In other words, you ended fiscal year 16-17 in better shape than we anticipated. But again, if I recall correctly, is that significant capital funds request occurred after we looked at the tentative budget. So it wasn't even on the radar screen, so to speak, in terms of picking it up, but that's a major piece and why the ending balance is significantly higher in your average, basically your end of the year annual financial report or new beginning balance compared to the number we used as a projected beginning balance in the May review. Are there any questions about Table C?
The interest that's projected on investments, that seems low, but I believe from prior discussions, the typical process on that is to try to budget that, shall we say, conservatively.
Yes, sir. The Department of Education has got a couple of areas where there are various, they somewhat, I guess I'll use the term adamant about, is don't overestimate your interest, for example, two places and other local revenue, because those can be, you can miss those, and so they want you to be conservative. And so the bottom line is if you have a good year, if the bank's doing well, and you have a good contract that pays more interest than what we anticipated, you're going to have, your interest income is going to be higher. A lot of that depends on just kind of what's on your books, because in many cases, and particularly in your case, a big piece of what is earning interest for you is what you have that you haven't spent, particularly in your restricted building fund.
If I could ask one more follow-up while we're
Sure.
still in revenues, is the Medicaid revenue is projected to be $44,000 less than last year's actuals. Is that another conservative path, or do we know something that might be affecting that downward?
They've actually had discussions on the federal level that Medicaid could be cut, so we're just being conservative in budgeting that. We have brought in, as you can see, the actuals in the past, but we don't want to overestimate that bucket of money in case they do get cut and we don't get reimbursed in the current fashion we're being reimbursed at the moment.
And that's not uncommon to do, because at this time of the year, the federal fiscal year runs November 1 to October 31. Oh, I'm sorry, October 1 to September 30. And so there's a lot of things that are still somewhat in flux. And that's one of them would be Medicaid, but even some of your other grants that won't lock in until real close to October 1. Now, Table D does take a hard look at various components that make up total local revenue. And you can see where we are been pretty conservative, and in the other local revenue section, there's a considerable decline in that one piece. But those can fluctuate and do fluctuate.
And the reason for that is?
Well, part of it is just simply you don't know. For example, occasionally you'll get when the auditors finish their work, they'll find, for example, that there is basically you're able to recapture some revenue that you expended the prior year, a refund of prior expenditures. That can happen. Or you can determine that for some reason a Fund 1 payment that you weren't expecting is made, or in several cases, this is kind of the category where several years ago when you had surplus some buildings and you sold them, that would show up here. And basically, so you're dealing with a lot of one-time type of revenue events, and sometimes you just don't have any reasonable idea of expectations. Now I'm going back a few years, but there was one year where you actually had a significant amount of money returned to the district, and the board was somewhat hesitant to do anything with it because they weren't for sure that it really. It took a while for the Department of Revenue to convince, I think, everyone that legitimately that money belonged to the district, because it was over a tax protest that took several years to settle, and then the department collected and sent it, kind of even as a special check, with the caveat that it still could be protested again. But after a period of time, it was determined there weren't going to be any further protests, so it really did belong to the district. Okay, any further questions on revenue? Please ask. I want you to feel comfortable with everything that's here. Table E gives you a look at comparing the working budget, column C against column B, actual expense. Whereas what you expended in 16-17 against what you estimate you're going to spend in 17-18. And you can go down column D and see the dollar change that has occurred.
Can you go over the big variances?
Sure. In Object Code 100, that's a pretty significant variance, but my perspective on that is you did increase everyone's step, and you did do some work on your salary schedule, and made some minor adjustments in certain places. So that's basically what happened. That's for the reason for that one.
Well, before we leave that one,
Sure.
I've got some questions of details behind it. Shall we address them as we go through each area? Is that a logical
That's
step?
good with me. We'll
Okay.
do the best we can to answer them.
So, under Object Code 100, getting down to the details, look like extended day pay increased $71,000 or 15%. I guess probably part of that had to do with maybe we added some extended days to some people. Is that all of it, or what's driving that 15% increase in that?
The elementary and middle school counselors all received, I don't know the exact number of days, got extra days. The preschool principal was increased days, and then both Campbell and Baker added an assistant principal, so that extended days, which came from Section 6 funds, because they used a teacher allocation to add an assistant, and they were told the extra had to come out of their supply budgets, so that's been transferred up into payroll from their supply budgets. So it's kind of buried in some entries when you look at the 600 series, that you're not seeing that decrease in the 600 series, but you are seeing the increase on the payroll side. So
Okay,
that's the extended days.
I'm not following that. I thought the two principals that were added were coming from the funds at the schools.
They
So
are,
are.
they are,
So that's showing up here where
because
they
they put the money,
reimburse us.
yes.
Yes,
Okay.
I have done the entry to move it from the school's budget, which we call the Section 6. So like, we moved it out of their supply budgets,
Okay.
basically, up into the payroll budget to be able to have the budget to pay.
They're
those
paying the
assistants.
same way,
But
the
it makes
additional
that
days, we're
category
not paying any of that at the
increase.
local, at the
Okay, I
district
thought that
level.
was the case.
Mr. Heisel,
I think that's all I had for 0100. I've got some of
Okay.
200. But
on 200, we can talk about 200.
Okay, in 200, were you involved with the calculation of the various contribution levels? Because it seemed like under employee benefits, it seemed like they might be a little high.
In terms of,
In terms of, if you try to get down to the details and say, like CERS employer contribution, here's what the expected payroll would be, multiply that times the rate of 19.18%, which used to be 18.68%. So the way I see it, that one line item went up 31%, but certainly certified pay didn't go up 31%, and to go from 18.6% to 19.1%, that's not a 31% increase either.
good question, couple. But in the broad category of employee benefits, remember that's where workers' comp falls, unemployment falls. And then the other item you have to, every fall, that kind of exercise we do is we look at your staff and, okay, who is now eligible for retirement? And you can, in the district, Paul, if I recall correctly, a person decides to retire, their accumulated sick leave, there's a 30% buyout. So you're required to go through the steps of the math to determine how much is it going to cost you if everyone that was eligible to leave, what it would cost. Now, do we put that whole amount in the budget? My sense is we probably don't put everything in there, but,
Not if it accrued sick leave, when we do percentage.
okay. So the point is,
Sorry, I didn't hear.
we don't put the total amount that it would take because reason, at least up to this point, is it's been pretty stable. In other words, you can look back 4 or 5 years, take an average of how many people actually retired, take that times the value of the total buyout and put that in your budget as an expected expense for people retiring and cashing in their sick leave. So that can cause that to jump some. If this year I got more eligible people to retire than I had last year, we do the math, then that could be a part of the puzzle. Now, can we can take a look at that and provide you, quite certain we can provide you with the detail because you're correct. Just the one item alone in terms of the CERS contribution wouldn't cause it to go up.
He actually has the detail and the specific line item you're talking about that's budgeted at 1.161, is that what?
Yes, ma'am.
If you do 19.18% of the 6.615202, you're actually budgeting 1.268. But the reason that amount did not get budgeted is because some of the classified of that 6.6 million pay into KTRS and not CERS. So in reality, if you do the 6.6 times 19.8%, that is actually less than it should have been, but it is less because a portion pay into KTRS. And that was taken into account the individual people when I budgeted this. I have a huge spreadsheet by individual person, by org, of who pays into what, and that's how I calculated benefits. I did straight percentages.
I sort of did a similar thing to try to back into, because it's not, you're not paying on 100% of all certified, and it's like maybe an average in the past of 80% or something like that.
So the percentage is probably what's throwing it off a little bit because I was pulling exact salaries of the people in those categories to calculate that.
Well, the CERS went up 31%, FICA went up 24%, Medicare went up 15%, and none of our pays went up that much. So
I mean, literally, I have a spreadsheet that pulled the exact salary amount from the payroll, and I know the exact people who pay into KTRS, meaning they don't pay CERS or FICA, so those were backed out, and I calculated the 19.8% on the people who pay in straight to CERS.
could it be that you had it, because I'm looking backwards at some of these, try to compare because I don't have the details, and that maybe the composition of people that paid into KTRS might have changed because
It's very possible
because
from
the
the
K-
tentative budget to the working budget that changes.
because KTRS only went up 0.1%, so I would have expected that to be a little bit higher. So maybe that's an offsetting factor. How about the unemployment insurance? That's going up 70% from actuals last year to the budget this year.
And that, in a previous email, that was, you questioned that, and it was addressed that I inadvertently booked back the expense for this year because the invoice was dated in June. And I booked all June invoices back to the prior fiscal year, because typically June payments would be in the prior fiscal year. But in the audit, we found that that was an accident, and that will be moving back forward to the fiscal 18, which puts it back in line at the 380,000 budget that we have budgeted.
Oh, that's workers' comp.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I was on unemployment insurance.
That's
But because
44,000, okay.
unemployment went from 74,000 down to 59, which I like that direction, but then it went back to 100. And it could just be that it's,
I don't
We'll
know
call
the
it a conservative
direct
estimate.
correlation of, I mean, I fill out the quarterly paperwork and they tell you what you owe based on,
but you're not aware of any rate change or anything like that. So I can hope on that if there wasn't any rate change, that this might flesh itself out in our favor later on. Okay,
It has a tendency to do that unless there is a rate change.
yeah, so not that I'm aware of.
okay, that's good. So that's another thing we can be hopeful for.
And you can watch as the year progresses. You can get a feel for is it going to play its how it's going to play itself out. Because I look at the numbers every month from the standpoint of any given object code. Kind of what's the year-to-date spend or year-to-date revenue collection versus what the budget calls for. And sometimes you can fairly early you can pick it out. Other times it's like, okay, we're waiting for June 30th because that's the only way we're going to know. And some of them, but your budgeting practices, I think, are pretty solid. You're not too, I think if you look at your AFR and you compare actuals to what the budget is, you're not off significantly up or down. I think it usually tends to roll pretty well.
That's all I had with the exciting world of O200.
Okay.
Before you leave accumulated benefits, every year you put in that the working budget provides sufficient funds to pay accumulated benefits at the time of retirement for all eligible staff members. And it's very unlikely that all eligible staff members will choose to retire at the same time. This may be the year where they all choose to do that. So
That's why I
I want to make sure we got enough money to pay
Yeah.
pay all of them off.
preface the remark that, to date, basically.
Yes.
But, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't wish it upon you, but
That's
you at
something I
least
think
are
we
in a
need to be
position where
careful
you
of,
could
so.
deal with it. There are school districts, several of which I work with, that's kind of their board's current nightmare is that if that were to
Right.
happen, they can't cover the bill.
Right.
So from that perspective,
I would say this year in particular, it's important that that money be there because like we've made.
and I know the last several meetings I've been, Mr. Heisel raises that flag. We don't know what's going to happen with the pension issue. The 300 is an increase of about $120,000. Sure.
Are there changes, and I think I got confused on this too, going on with, I know we made a change at the last meeting on the remuneration or compensation for the nursing staff going from 35 to 40 hours. Are there other changes in the budget? And you tried to explain it to me, but I might have been slow on it, having to do with Medicaid that might be impacting this area of purchased professional and technical services.
The Medicaid budget that we set up is in the 0100 and 200 series at the moment, and 600 and 700.
Okay.
There's 250,000 that we added on the expense side to match the revenue, 250 that's budgeted, but they're in 100, 200, 6, and 700.
So there's nothing in 300 then?
No, sir.
Because medical services went up from $9,800 to $28,500.
Well, I actually looked at that, and the budgets are the same as the previous year's budgets. It's just that we didn't spend in the 17 year the whole budget. But the budget for this year is actually exactly the same as the budget in medical services for 17.
Okay, so there's nothing that y'all know about.
No.
And then the same thing on other professional services, that went up $79,000. Is there anything you know about that might be driving that?
Again, that's the same situation. The budgets are the same, it's just we didn't spend the total budgeted dollars for 17, so the comparison between actuals to budget this year looks like a big jump when it's really not when you're looking at just budgets.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
The next significant change is in 0600 supplies. The current budget calls for approximately 313,000 more dollars than what you actually spent in 16-17.
Okay.
Dr. Wagner, you missed 400 and 500. We're going to miss all the fun tonight.
Oh, well,
I don't want
Dr.
to
Kudak-
interrupt you.
Dr. Kudak said significant. I wasn't really considering $6,300 to be significant.
It's an increase, it's significant.
Okay, there we go. Well, we'll back up to 400 then.
On the 400, let me make sure, Mrs. Ellis, I understand how this works. We're sort of still in a transition period. If you get into the details of the budget, the copier rental fees, the copier rental costs are still the same of what's budgeted in there for the schools, but probably that'll eventually be moved over to supply because that's in reality where it's going to be moved to. Okay. And the other rentals, the budget on that was 31.5, and last year we only used 11,850. Was that? Do we know anything that's going on there?
No, sir, that would be kind of the same situation. The budget's always been about that much, it's just that we haven't spent that much.
Okay, I like that. Which is a lot better than the answer is, oh yeah, there's something bad we have to spend money on. Okay. And did you have anything else in 500, Mrs. Hicks? I'm sorry, in 400?
Mine's in 600 when we get there.
In 500, maybe it's the same thing again. Telephone was budgeted 88.2 and we only spent 66 last year.
Yeah, we haven't changed the budgets on those. The utility budgets have kind of rolled forward every year, just because you don't know with long distance calls and all that kind of stuff. So we don't really change the budget on those. They just kind of roll forward. And
Okay.
with the utilities and all of that, we've actually decreased some of those budgets due to our energy savings from what we have improved over the last couple of years.
On travel, that almost doubled. Is that because of any known changes, or again, we just sort of use last year's budget as a holding place?
That could be a combo of people have, decided to do more PD travel events and they're moving their money from other categories into that, and some of it is budgets and it wasn't spent. It could be a combo of the two.
So on travel, that's probably something that, for lack of a better term, is bottom-up driven. That,
Yes, it's if there's an event
Okay.
going on that the directors
With
or
all the
principals
changes, with all the
feel-
changes coming and
Yeah.
everything, there's been additional
There's a lot of
things.
extra
There's
needs.
going to be more.
so I'm going to note that this is an intentional bump up in the budget amount. I'm done with 500.
Good thing, because if any more leave, we're done. You keep running
Is
everybody out of
it
here.
me?
I think so.
Oh my goodness.
Nobody else can leave or we don't have a quorum.
Yeah.
Okay, the next object code is 600 in supplies.
Okay, supplies. That seems to be a rather significant increase.
That's due to the 10% of their Section 6 monies were given to them to make them 100% funded in Section 6 because they had at the tentative level only been 90% funded.
Did we do that this year too?
Yeah,
I thought we
that-
just did that for last year when we went back and put it in for last year.
No, we put it in for, no, that's what she's,
And they're using it to pay a principal's salary. and
no.
Is it, didn't you, somebody just say that the schools that hired principals are using their supply budget to fund it?
That's where they chose, they had to pay for it out of their Section 6
Oh,
funds.
I wasn't answering that part of the question. I was answering the fact that, yeah, that we just put that in. We just did the Section 6 money, and at the tentative budget, we hadn't done that. They were 90%, now it's at 100%. We put it back, but not for them to do that. That was just, because we said that's what we, that was what we wanted to do.
Supplies.
I thought we just did that for last year when we
But
put it
it's
back
two
in.
separate budgets. Last year, that's budget's gone and done. We're on a
Right,
new
but
budget.
didn't it have, so did this come to us to, did the board
It's coming
vote
to you
on?
now in the working budget.
Okay, so in our tentative budget, it was not
It
there.
was 90%
90%.
funded in the tentative budget.
Okay, so
This is
nothing
a
has been
decision the
allocated, it hasn't gone to the
superintendent has.
schools yet. This amount hasn't gone to the schools yet then?
It is now because it's sitting in the budget. It's been adjusted in the working budget.
But if we don't approve it,
It'll
If
get
you don't
changed.
approve the working budget,
It'll
then
get changed.
Okay. Okay.
The SPDM allocation is based on their ADA, and they have all met their ADA that they should be 100% funded. So the superintendent has that decision based on the allocation documents that put that money back when they are fully at their ADA.
Do you know approximately how much that 10% figure amounts to?
It was $66,531.
That's a pretty good estimate.
That's the
High school's
exact dollar
high school's
amount.
21,000 of that, and then the others were 6,000 to 7,000 below that.
Okay, I've got a couple specific
High
questions,
school was what?
but I want to jump
About
on what other
20,000.
questions you might have in Mrs. Six.
And then,
No, that,
The others, the elementaries were about 5, probably, and middle schools were about 7.
what does intermediate fall in there?
I'm calling that middle.
Okay.
If you're intermediate and middle school, they were 7. That's just off the top of my head, that's rough
I have
figures.
to- Well, hold on, I actually have it off.
Where are we at, Dr. Bob? Sorry.
We're in the 600s.
600.
Okay.
Supplies.
We're glad you came back. They were getting nervous we'd have to call
The
it a
high
day.
school got 20,928. Campbell got 10,802. Baker got 11,649. Concrete and Justice both got 5,917. Shear got 5,123, and Strode got 6,195.
What was the total on that? What's the
Total
aggregate?
is 66.
What'd you say the high, oh, sorry. Did you get it, Judy?
20,009 something.
Huh?
20,009 something.
928,
Oh,
I
just
think.
under 21.
2928.
And 10,000, 11,000, and then,
And that's based on the allocation form where it specifically, Dr. Bob drew up that whole allocation. Here was 100%. We gave them 90% at the tentative budget, so they got the difference. And that's the difference of the two. And you can pull that from the allocation, staffing allocation.
If I recall, y'all did the same method last year, right? Held back 10%, and then when it looked okay, you gave it to them.
But typically, isn't that, don't we usually hold out 10%?
I don't remember,
Yes.
we had been holding out 10%.
Yeah, you always hold out 10% to make, that's how the staffing allocation is written. You all approve 90% funded of their section 6. And then when they hit fifth day attendance, if they met their ADA marks, which all the schools did, you give them the extra 10%. That's how the
Or we have
staffing
traditionally done that?
traditionally.
As far as I remember, that's what we did. We've been.
Well, and I'm fine with that when it's used for supplies, but then when they go hire people
Well,
with
I-
supply
you know,
money,
but
I've
that's
got a
the
with
problem
that.
when you, like the money that the board set aside to give each school, the 200,000 or whatever, I have no say in how they spend that.
Section 6 is driven by
That's-
SPDM
that's
council. They
site-based.
have the say
I
so
would
on
say
how they
that's
spend that money.
gone
They
anyway.
chose the.
No, it was
Campbell and
carried
Baker.
over. A bunch of it's carried out. You're gonna see that later. A bunch of
oh, I'm
money's
talking
carried
about,
over.
we're talking about different things. I'm talking about the copier lease from this year. Okay. So you're saying it's out of your hands that they can do with it?
When it goes to the section 6, yeah, it's site-based, it's not controlled by site-based.
So if we were not to approve this budget, that still would not affect section 6 money?
Well, you would, only if you just gave some direct order to take that 10% back. I mean, told me that's what you wanted me to do, you know, take that 10% back. They only funded at 90%, take 10% of that, that would be the 20,900 and all the numbers that they gave you back.
And then it would let you allocate it, or?
Well, it would go back, no, it would go back into your general fund.
Basically go back.
It'd go back in, so you all would allocate it. I don't allocate anything out of general fund. You all would hit that money with that 66,000 will go back into your general fund, and then you could allocate it how you see fit.
So it
I
would
don't
not be
think-
in any
I don't-
particular object code?
No, it would be in your general fund.
If you choose to take that away, it goes back into contingency.
Contingency, general fund.
And that's.
Yeah,
So
I
it
don't,
goes to contingency, not general fund?
That is general
Okay.
fund. Contingency is your extra money in general fund that is not budgeted in a line item.
Okay.
That's where.
Extra money in general
Extra
fund.
Yes.
It's any money, and
Contingency
any
is-
money in the general fund that's not allocated to a line item is your contingency. So this 66, if you take that back, it's not allocated to anything, so it would go back into the contingency.
So the
Unless you choose to
contingency
allocate.
is not determined by all revenue sources? Is it only general fund?
Well, your contingency technically, even though the contingency amount that we show is all general fund dollars. But you compute it against what's the value of all your funds.
Okay.
Okay? But it resides in a
So I
line
can't
item
just
of
look
its
at
own.
my total general fund. The percentage of it is not the contingency.
No.
The percentage
Well, the
of
percentage-
total of all funds.
This is a little different than what it shows
With-
the contingency just for the general
Yes.
fund nature. Okay?
I've got some more fun, detailed questions in 600. Awards, that was a 35% increase. Is that just the standard budget amount, or do we know something special that's going on there?
The largest budget in Fund 1 is the AP awards for the money that's set aside to give the students for AP achievement, and they get awarded for that. That
If they
budget
pass
is a
their
standard
test.
budget, and it just depends on the students how much of that budget gets used. And so, budget is the same, the expense was just less than the budget last year.
Which I like. Now,
No,
these,
that's the one you
No,
want.
that's the one you want to
want
Well,
see.
to
it's
see.
getting high
Because you-
because your
yeah.
students are getting awarded, so.
That means they're scoring well on their AP course test.
I don't have any kids at school anymore. See what happens. The diesel fuel, I'm almost afraid to ask this one, that's up 24%. Is that intentional? Are you all projecting that from a bottom-up basis of more miles driven and the price of diesel fuel going up, or was that a number that was
Probably
thrown in
both
high?
of those in that one.
Well,
And again, most of these budgets are based on the prior 2 years' averages, and then sitting down with the directors and then saying, I think we're
Looking
gonna
fuel
spend about
costs.
this much, and that's one of those categories. The actual spent was higher than the budgets last year, so we adjusted the budget up for this year to accommodate the extra fuel cost that the transportation seemed to be spending.
okay. Under equipment, supplies, and material, that's actually down significantly. Was there anything that was in the prior year that was driving that up?
Just depends on in the year what's
One,
decided to
two,
be purchased.
Yeah, we're
It's
still
good,
up
I'm
there.
waiting for Dr. Cadet to come back, I'll be back.
I'm sorry.
It just depends in the year, the individual departments and schools, what they choose to purchase, if that money gets moved around from another category, but there wasn't significant, like, intentional increase in the budget.
Okay. Natural gas, is that another, nobody thinks that natural gas is going to go up 31%. That's probably just maybe a carryover or a high estimate.
And at any time we're looking at any of these, you look at this budget and we can tell at Christmas, you go through, you know, and some things you know where you should be about 50% of the way through, but on something like natural gas, you know, if we get to May and we still got 75% of that in there, then that's something that can come back to you and you can look to move that, because by that time we know the bulk of the expenditures for natural gas has been used, so
Okay.
it can be amended, but we watch all of them.
I think the general tenor of a lot of these questions is there something we know that's changed the cost, that are we just sort of
Cost.
giving a good
Most
provision
instances,
for it?
No. I mean,
Okay.
I could go through the rest of the categories and tell you no. It's just simply, the budget was probably that last year, and we didn't spend that much money in 17, and so we just kind of carried the budget over.
Okay. Textbooks, for example, is that more of a carryover, or do we know anything changing there?
So that one, I carried the budget over there, I didn't change it.
So that's up 60,000. It's a pretty good chunk of increase, so.
So for that
Expectations, some pretty good
test.
change and some.
and supplemental books, repair parts, there's nothing that we really know about that's big that's driving any of that. We'll just call it budget carryover. Okay. Because again, I'm sort of fishing for not really the numbers, but what information there might be behind it. I'm done beating up 600. Y'all have anything on 600? Anything else?
Yeah. Did you beat up copier rental while I was out?
The thing about the copier, and let me, if I'm describing this incorrectly, is copier rental is up because they have the fee in there going to the charge of the central office essentially, and then they have left the fee, what last year's copier payments in there, and really probably what they need to do is move it from there over to supplies.
Okay.
That's what's causing that to go up so much, according to Zealous' explanations.
Okay.
Now, supplies themselves are also pretty high, so I kind of question that amount because, I mean, realistically, that's gone up $200,000, and it probably has another $100,000 it should go up, so that seemed like a pretty substantial
So the
increase.
copiers are not already included in supplies?
They're in the big supplies. I was down in the individual line items underneath supplies. There's a line item within supplies called simply general supplies. It's not on, you're looking at supplies from the total, and I was
Yes.
getting into the weeds.
Okay, from taking all the 600s all the way through the budget.
Yes.
Okay.
It certainly seems like if you add $100,000, that's an estimate, to general supplies, that's a $300,000 increase. It's a pretty substantial increase.
Again, I think, like she said, most of that's the carryover part.
Because the other factor we have going on that's buried in these numbers is the carryover. And things that probably should have been paid if the bill had come in time in June in last year, but they're carried over into this year, and that's in your table appendix C at the end. Another thing that makes it confusing to try to figure out what these increases are that might be tied in with that. It's essentially a carryover number. Okay.
Okay.
Next object code is 700. Any questions?
Another big variance, so.
Furniture and fixtures. We haven't hardly budgeted anything last year. We spent 197. Do you know what that was spent on last year, off the top of your head? It's causing that big decrease?
Not right off, Alicia might be no particular, but I don't right off.
I'm trying to think of buildings we put online in 2017 that,
Campbell that went,
The second part of camp,
the second part of Campbell, was that 2016?
that could have, some of it could have fell in there, because that was back at the very start of it.
We really
And then
stand,
the year before is when we put everything in, but some of that could have carried over into.
it really stood out because the year before was 13, we went up to 200 and down to 35, so.
Well, that's when we were, the 200 when we were moving into Campbell and those others, when we bought the furniture and all that. Now, on that, we need to look at furniture replacement costs. That's on that 5-year plan.
Tech software went up almost 100%. Do I need to wait for Mrs.
Yeah,
Ellis on
yeah.
these in the weeds questions? How about vehicles? Do you know about any vehicles that we budgeted for in this next year? New board party bus?
Yeah.
No, that was a joke, Dr. Wagner, it's just a joke. We'll write that down, Mrs. Nance.
I don't know, at some point, our backhoe is down, it's done. I mean, we've spent more on it than it's worth.
How long have we had it?
We bought it when I was director of operations, my second or third year. We bought it after, we bought it from the rental place that we'd already paid for it once in rental fees from them. So it's 10 years old since we've had it, but they had it probably 3 or 4 years prior to that, so it's 13, 14 years old.
And our buses are not in here.
I'm not sure where that would be on some of your debt service would be in that with the buses, with
The buses that we approved last week are probably not in here because this was,
been paid. She doesn't have those listed already on the appendix C.
I'm thinking because it, This was probably prepared before we did
It
that.
was before we did that, so they're not listed on there yet now.
Because this is dated 7. The budget's dated 7.
It is.
How about skip to 900 other items? There's a big number there for fund transfers, so.
What Lisa was looking for, when you started talking copiers, she went in there to pull something on copiers.
She's not feeling well.
Okay.
You want to take a break?
Yeah, we can have a recess.
I mean, just an idea. Would y'all mind?
All right. We'll call a recess at 6:56 PM. You ready to reconvene? Okay, we'll reconvene at 7:03 PM. I think we were on 700, which is property.
And we were talking about copiers. Is that
Yeah.
where we were talking about copiers?
Yeah, we were on property, and we migrated back to copiers, which is under
We
400.
were not talking about copiers there, but I think you missed the copier discussion, and since it's important, you all might want to have it again.
That's okay.
It's okay? Okay, all right.
Okay, I'm still not clear. Where do copiers show?
In the 400s.
So not supplies.
No.
Because I saw the big number for the copier rental, and I was wondering whether we made a wise decision back in January or not, so.
I think so, yeah, it's still less than what, now some of that is some of the payments closing out with the other,
When I sat down with all of the schools to where to budget their Section 6 money, at that point, they still were paying for their copiers.
Okay,
And so it got budgeted to the copier, and then you all made the decision to pay the lease at the district level.
right.
So the budget got increased at the district level, but we did not take copier money away from the schools, because that's the money they were going to use for supplies since the
Okay.
school fees were not being charged. It
Okay.
just has not been moved out of the copier account
Okay,
code at this point, because they have the discretion to move their Section 6 money as they purchase.
So they chose to leave it there.
So right now, it's still in that budget, yes.
Then I guess the most important part is, the money's not in both accounts. Like,
No.
they didn't give them an allocation of $30,000 to supplies and then leave it up in copier. It
So
just up in
basically,
copiers.
they have depleted their supply budgets at this point and probably have nothing left on their budget. And when they get ready to buy more supplies, they will have to transfer that money from the copier
Copiers to the
account,
budget.
create more POs at that point.
So if they've depleted their copier budget, their supply budget, does that mean they've already spent the 10%?
No, no.
Okay,
They just got that money right now. I'm just saying, for the beginning of the school year, they used what they had budgeted in supplies at that point.
okay.
And so they just haven't moved the copier money for those new supplies for the school yet until they need it. They just move the money as they need it to the categories that they need it.
okay. All right.
Un- Under 700 tech software, that's more than doubled. Is there any, do we know something that's going on there that's causing that increase?
Tech software is where Lexia, Apex, and Reading Plus are paid from. And so the budget is increased for this year to accommodate those purchases.
Were they also in last year?
They were paid for last year, but
it wasn't in the budget to be done, but as
Wasn't.
an action, you all did it last year. As one of your board actions last year, we paid that. But it wasn't budgeted that way in the original.
It would have shown up in actuals though?
it's, I mean,
It could be this an item that needs to
the
be revisited.
139 in actuals is roughly the cost of what Apex, Lexi, and Reading Plus were last year. The budget, it wasn't in the budget last year, so basically, I increased the budget to accommodate those items, but I didn't take away budgets of other items that were budgeted there, and it just, in the previous year, wasn't spent out of those. But the same concept is, budget didn't change, they just didn't spend that much, but we did increase this budget to accommodate those three items. So it looks like it increased significantly due to that. Does that make sense? I don't know, just.
So
I'm
what
sorry.
else, so what else will come out of that?
So the tech software budget, excluding Lexia, Apex, we didn't change any of the tech software budgets that were already existent from 17. But I added the budget for those items, so it looks like the budget increased significantly from the actual spent last year, because where that money was budgeted in tech software last year, it just wasn't spent last year.
The next item, tech-related hardware, that actually went the other direction, went from 692 down to 220.
That's from the E-rate money that we gave technology last year. He came before, we asked for funds to be able to purchase on this E-rate plan that
Yep.
he had out, and you got 80% of that refunded back to us, technology plan, and so he was given that money to spend last year, but he wasn't given it this year, so that budget decreased, because we didn't get that till we did the second year.
Did he have some of that the prior year also? Because that was, okay.
Yeah.
So when he gets that money, that's what was spent, and the 220 that's budgeted now, you feel comfortable, it's not an under budgeted item?
No, it's just that he had the 1-year plan of the E-rate money, the 2-year plan prior year and last year, and that's done with not carrying it into this year.
And then the last one is vehicles, that's,
Um,
did you all, is that a bottom up thing, if you know what you were to spend 88.5 on, or was that a?
38 of it is what the 2 school buses that you all just approved at the September meeting
St. X.
for this St. Xavier.
Oh, that's already in there?
Yes, that's
Okay.
already in there. So the roughly 16,000 difference is typically budgeted there that just wasn't spent last year based on the way the budgets fell.
Okay. When was this budget done? I mean, it says 9/7.
That's when I printed it out and sent it to Dr. Bob.
And the buses were already in there?
It was already, I don't know, I guess they would have been.
'Cause we
It's
didn't meet
showing
till
now in
last
the budget.
week.
When I look at the actuals, I apologize. No, it wouldn't have been in this budget, the detail. I apologize for that. You're correct. Because 9/7 is when I did it. I was looking at my actual live screen this afternoon, so that's where my 38 is showing now. Nothing was budgeted extra. I mean, it's the same concept of the budget was rolled over, and so there's an additional 38 if you look at the books now, when you see the budget come before you in October on the monthly financial statement. Thank you for that caption, sis.
Anything else on property? I'm okay with debt service, that's kind of, we know where we're at there, that's a fairly predictable number.
Excuse me.
And then how about 900 other items, which was fund transfers out? Because there's 3.2 million there. So we go from 1.1 million to 3.2 million to 58,000.
Over 2 million was transferred to the construction fund for the athletic complex.
Okay.
When that VG went before and it was approved, that those funds were approved, so I went ahead and transferred them. Even though we haven't sold a bond or anything, that's what we've been operating on.
Okay. Now, when we sell bonds, will general fund be reimbursed for that money?
No, because you specifically put on the VG that 2 point whatever million.
Comes out of contingency.
Comes
Okay.
out of contingency, so it will not be reimbursed because that's how the VG is written.
Okay.
But on the other hand, it's already sitting over there waiting on it, so we've already essentially paid $2 million of that project. One minor thing in the 800s, under other miscellaneous expenditures, that went from 148 to 193. Any idea what that is?
I'd have to go look specifically on one items to know what the difference is. I did not look at that one, I apologize.
Well, in the whole scheme of things, not that big, if you could,
Oh, I'm sorry. The 148 is the indirect costs that are deposited that, that's not right. We're on the expense side. 148. Shoot, what is that? I'd have to go look, I apologize.
okay.
I'll have to get back to you. That's not business service.
Okay.
had an overall question
Yes, sir.
whenever it's appropriate for that. One of the things I didn't understand is, in terms of board policy, what changes are allowed within the budget? Because, you know, things change and sometimes you need to move money from, you know, supplies here to somewhere else. What is the board policy on what's allowed? Can money be moved anywhere up and down in the budget as long as the
There's no policy
contingency
that prevents
stays
it.
the
I
same?
went through all the policies today after you sent the question, and there's one that the bottom line, it basically says that when we'll present the budgets, and that we'll present a, I don't have the exact word, best estimate of the working budget, you know.
So in reality, what we're approving is really just the net bottom line. Anything above that can be changed at the discretion of administration?
Well, I think based on what was described, technically, yes. But I think in practice, what occurs is minor things, sometimes, you know, our adjustments are made. So major items, it's my observation, particularly in the past year, that anything that was major is usually brought to the board prior to to at least make the board aware of a major adjustment and what it's for, et cetera, et cetera. But in your general fund, you do have a lot of flexibility in where you move items. Because you can get, let's keep in mind, it's a plan. This is a spending plan that 3 months down the road, something could occur that causes you to have to make a significant directional change. Or you might, in March, discover that in a particular area, you know you're not going to expend dollars in this particular area, and you've got a need in another area. So what I think my suggestion on moving forward is, I don't think you want to do anything restrictive, but you may want to have a conversation, or at least define what the practice has been in terms of, it's kind of like defining what's major that you would want to know about. I mean, I know you make the assumption you would want to know a lot of things, but in the big scheme of basically a $60 million budget, is it really important? How much do you want to know? Is what the question comes down to. Most boards that I work with are interested in a big change. And in most cases, before that occurs, and I think the practice has been here, the superintendent is going to say, I would like to make this adjustment for these reasons, and it's advising the board, and in some cases, I'm quite certain they've even asked the board to approve the change. So you've got a lot of flexibility in how you establish practices, and all I can refer to is kind of what I've observed over the years in terms of how this board is operated. Because you could spend an inordinate amount of time if every time you had a board meeting, you went through and we made a change, and it's a relatively minor change, that a change was made. So it comes down how much do you really want to know, because what really matters is, here's the start point and here's the end point, and does your contingency fund remain stable? You would, if suddenly you were looking at a monthly report in May and you were looking at your numbers and they didn't match up without digging into the contingency to a significant amount, that would be a rude surprise to everyone. But I've not observed that in practice here. And so it's going to come down to what level are you comfortable with in allowing the administration to make changes. And so then you get into, if nothing else, to your satisfaction as a board, defining what's a minor change and defining what's a major change.
But at this point in time, I'm sorry, we don't have a policy really that says, yeah, you can move stuff from school admin to business support services. Really, the whole playing field is available to you as long as we don't change, as long as they don't affect the bottom line.
That's an accurate description, but that's not an unusual situation. I think most boards are fairly close to that. Now, some boards set parameters. In other words, if it's got a value of, let's say, $100,000 that you want to move, we want to know about it. And in some cases, probably even as their practices, or maybe they've outlined it in a procedure, is that the board would approve that amendment. But minor changes, and I can't define that for you except from my perspective. And you have to make that decision. Basically, I'll share with you in my opinion. A minor change is basically, in most cases, anything under $100,000. A major change is anything 100,000 plus. So you've got to decide where you want to set the bar on some of that, or you're going to be spending an inordinate amount of time in your board meetings with budgetary issues when your primary focus, I would hope, is what are we doing for kids in terms of instructional programs and such. And it doesn't it doesn't mean that you're not interested or reduce your fiduciary responsibilities overall, but as long as you can look at a monthly report and you're satisfied that revenues and expenditures are either running concurrently or revenues is running slightly ahead of expenditures. Now, keep in mind, there are periods of the year, July through October, when your expenditures could be running ahead of revenues, but simply because until those local tax receipts start coming in, and they usually come in late November to early December in large amounts, you kind of run behind a little bit. But once those local revenues start pouring into the district's coffers, usually your revenues are then running ahead of your expected expenditures. And those are the indicators that you would want to know. And then if you have questions about specific issues, I'm quite confident the staff will jump through whatever hoops necessary to get you the answer that you need. So it's a matter. So again, it kind of comes back to what, as a board, are you comfortable with? And that's a decision that the board has to make, and hopefully in conjunction with the finance officer and the superintendent, so everyone kind of knows what the rules or the guidelines are on that. But I can just simply say, for the years I've been here, that's my observation of how it's worked. And it seems at the end of the day, so to speak, it's worked pretty well.
So if your definition of minor and major is the $100 cutoff, is this $100,000 cutoff or $100,000 amount?
Mm-hmm.
Is this amount a recurring expense?
Well, if I was going, I'll just try. Let me try this. My experience as superintendent. If I have determined that we need to make a major change because of a change in focus on something, and I've gone through the budget and I said, it looks like to me that we can move the equivalent of $100,000 from existing expenditures because we need to make this expenditure. It could be something that's, what do we get with great regularity from Frankfurt? Called unfunded mandates. And sometimes you don't have a whole lot of choice, so you got to figure out where you're going to get it. But if I can demonstrate that I'm comfortable and confident that these areas in the budget will be under budget enough that we could pull collectively from even a variety of sources, let's say it's going to take $110,000, and I can demonstrate that to you, that at the end of the day it doesn't affect the bottom line nor dip into the contingency fund, I'm going to advise the board that this is what, in my opinion, we need to do, and from my perspective, most likely ask permission to do it. Now, if it only requires a $25,000 move, then I'm going to make the move, and it's just me. I would probably still tell you in writing that I did it, just so you would know.
We're not going to make any kind of decision that's going to put a $100,000 recurring cost. I'm not going to make that kind of decision to do something.
Well, I know, just part of what I'm thinking about is a few years ago, maybe several years ago now, a position was created at the school level, and the council had every right to do it. I understand that councils have the right to do this. But now that position is no longer a school position. It's it's paid from board funds.
It morphed
Okay.
into a board position.
Yes. So this summer, without board knowledge until after the fact, to my knowledge, I didn't know about it, to assistant principal positions, the two schools decided they needed an additional assistant principal. Okay, that's funded out of school, and the council, I understand they had the right to do that. But these seem to be major positions, and, the position, that job title exists, so yeah, they can use that. It's not creating a new position, but it's a new position in those buildings. Okay, how long before those recurring expenses, those recurring positions become in that personnel stuff, when
Only you can
we're
put it
funding
there.
it there?
Only this group can put it there.
For my,
At a recurring cost.
I would-
Only this group. The 5 of you are the only 5 that can do that.
can take the step. I mean, as it's constructed right now, it's a 1-year position.
Yeah.
It goes away in May. And if the board allocates enough funds, and that's how that school council wishes to spend their dollars, they can recreate the position. But basically, at the end of the year, I'm practicing law and I don't have the credentials for it, but my assumption is that I would issue a letter in reduction of responsibility, because the board, unless the board took action to create it as a permanent position, I'm basically putting that individual, their assignment next fall, as of May of 18, would be a classroom instructor.
Okay, because what I'm looking at is, at one school, we have 2 growth teachers. Okay, that school used, I don't know if they used a teaching position in their allocation to do the new assistant principal.
Yeah.
But if that's the case, and now we're funding 2 growth teachers without.
The growth
board
teachers
approval.
didn't have anything to do with that. The assistant principal thing was in place. The growth teachers are purely based on numbers. That's on pure numbers, that's it.
Okay, and we have to approve growth teachers. The board has no choice about that.
Well, you want to stay in compliance with class caps.
Class caps.
To make that happen, yes, basically you do have to approve them. But you've done a very good job every year of creating positions where you need them, but at the end of the year, they go away. And the only thing that would then add a position back is if the projected numbers that we're looking at in February suggests you need to add a position or 2. And that's just basic, that's based on enrollment. Now, the other issue that we're discussing is one that to really get the reason and how they proceeded is simply to ask that school's council to come and explain to the board how they got it accomplished, how they did what they wanted to do.
Okay, how long do councils have to use and indicate how they are using their allocations?
In terms of setting a budget for the
Right,
council?
or, once the board allocates 12 positions to school X.
And
Okay.
Okay.
And the council has the meetings and decides how they want to use those 12 positions.
And what,
Okay, and they come back to us telling us how they're using it by, is that May
There's a
1st or
date.
31st or?
there is a date.
There's a day, I want to say it's the 15th.
Yeah,
Sometime in May, I can't remember exactly.
but they do have to report back to the
And
superintendent.
they can't keep a position back, they say can they say, we're gonna use 10 positions for this, we have not yet decided how we're gonna use the other 2, or whatever? Can the councils do that?
Well, the practice right now is they get in the staffing allocation, they receive the form of here's based
Right.
on the numbers where we say you should allocate people. They sign off on that and say, we're gonna use it this way and send it back to us by that date. There's no
Okay, so
holding
they-
anything out. It's,
So they account for every position
Yeah.
that is allocated by the date that it comes back?
Yes. That is your,
I mean, that's what's.
it's a requirement.
Okay.
Here.
I thought that was a requirement, but I thought I'd heard that someone didn't do that, but. So, oh, I guess it's if someone leaves between the time, they would still have that allocation even if they haven't filled that position?
Correct.
Okay, got it. Okay,
And then they could choose to do with that as they wish.
Choose to use it differently than they were
Okay.
using it before that person left.
right, okay.
Okay?
Got it. That was the,
Yep.
So, Mr. Heisel, did we at least get at part of what your question was?
Yes, yes, okay. Thank you, Ms. Ellis.
From my standpoint, doing this for the past 6.5 years, I mean, the numbers I look at are the big groups, 100, 200, 300, 400. And if I have questions, then I get down to the weeds and I look at the individual things. But, you know, I pay attention to when certain things are above and certain things are below. So that's, you know, that's kind of the level I prefer to look at things. But it's nice to have that next level of detail in case things are not going the way you expect. So.
Well, Table F on page 4 simply looks at projected personnel expenses, and you're kind of right in what I consider to be a sweet spot in terms you're right around 80%. That fluctuates a bit. Just please understand that as the total budget number fluctuates, that percentage can go up or down. But 80%, I'm quite comfortable with that. I think we've had discussions over the years where it's even been slightly higher than that, but that's a good place to be. Now, if you look at Table G quickly on page 5, that's simply looking at a comparison between the tentative budget and the working budget, and some changes that have occurred since May to now. The other items, things I would point out is you're required to have a 2% contingency. And the math that I use, it brings it out to about $1.28 million for 2%. Excuse me, KDE encourages you to have a 5%, which I can calculate to be 3.2 million. You actually have an unrestricted reserve of $14.1 million. So, I mean, you're in a very healthy position to do, quite frankly, I guess, about whatever you would choose to do. On page 6, Table H describes that, looking at expenses percent of revenue, this particular budget is slightly unbalanced by about $285,000. My sense, we could probably look at this from a variety of directions, but my sense is if everything that's listed in Appendix C were removed, then it would be, you know, structurally balanced to several $100,000 to the good. But the thing I like about your Appendix C is simply when you examine that, all those are one-time expenditures. In other words, you put them in, from year to year, you take them out. So, and that meets the criteria that I'm usually reminded of is I don't have any discomfort with this budget the way it is because I know that you've got over $800,000 of one-time expenditures that next year, if it wasn't feasible, you could call that back and, you know, make some other adjustments. So overall, I think you've got a good budget. You're real close to basically having a perfectly structurally balanced budget. I think the most important thing to me is you just kind of, you know, looking at what the projections were in panel 1 and looking at what the actuals are. You know, you've had, over the last 5 years, 4 of those years, 4 of the 5 years, you finished under 100%, which means your recurring revenue exceeded your actual expenditures, which is where you would want to be, and that's gone a long way towards reasoning why you've accumulated the contingency that you have. And I know that you started on a basically down a path last year of putting some additional funds into your schools. I assume that that went well, and you actually, even if I understand correctly, had some carryover into this year's budget. So, you know, that direction, if you continue to follow that, seems to be pretty solid. So. Any final questions?
462,000 of that is carryover that you approved to carry over, so, and that was money that was left over at the schools that you all approved for them to carry over.
This is the all-important Appendix C,
Yes.
which is, it's really an important part of this budget is to offset those, as you said, stuff that should have been in last year but didn't make it. And that's why our contingency last year was a little bit higher. And you ought to take that off the top really in evaluating this year.
So if there are no final questions, thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, sir.
All right, other discussion? If not, a motion is in order to consider adoption of the 2017-18 working budget as presented and discussed. Anyone? I'll remind everyone that we have to have a working budget by September 30th. So if nobody wants to approve budget tonight, we're going to be back here pretty shortly.
I think I still have a lot of understanding to get to regarding how the changes will occur as the year goes by, but it's my sense in total that with the, after going through the adjustment, it's a fairly reasonable starting point. And so I would propose that we approve the budget as has been proposed. That's my motion.
So, motion by Mr. Heisel. I'll second it. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain.
No, I said aye.
Aye. Everybody said aye. Judy? Okay. So motion carries 5-0. Quietly. Okay. Next up is consider approval of GRC High School boys golf team trip to compete in the state tournament if qualified October 1st through 4th, 2017. Mr. Keene's not here to discuss it.
These are both just
If qualified.
yeah.
The girls qualified today.
Yeah, girls qualified today.
Okay.
There was a boy that qualified.
Yeah.
Any other discussion? If not, a motion is in order to consider approval of GRC High School boys golf team trip to compete in the state tournament, if qualified, October 1 through 4, 2017.
I'll make that motion, it's written.
Motion by Mr. Perida,
Second.
second by Ms. Ritchie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Let's see, and then the next one is same motion for the girls team, and their dates are October 4 through 7, 2017.
I move that we approve for the GRC girls golf team to compete in the state tournament October 4th through the 7th, 2017.
Okay, motion by Ms. Hicks,
Second.
second by Ms. Ritchie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Motion is in order to approve school fundraiser requests as presented, or as presented in documentation we received earlier. So we would just be acknowledging that correctly, correct? Okay.
Okay. I'll make that motion.
Okay, motion by Ms. Ritchie,
I'll-
second by Mr. Parrott. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Motion is in order to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Ms. Ritchie,
Second.
second by Ms. Hicks. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Board is adjourned at 7:37 p.m.